The massive crystalline spire of the Galactic Council headquarters pierced the purple sky of Nexus Prime like a blade of pure light. Inside its highest chamber, 300 alien species had gathered for what many believed would be humanity's final judgment. Ambassador David Kane walked through the enormous circular doorway, his footsteps echoing in the vast space that could have held 10 Earth football stadiums. The chamber walls rose in perfect spirals, each level housing different species arranged by their galactic influence. At the bottom sat the newest members, barely recognized civilizations clutching their voting tablets with nervous appendages. Higher up, the middle powers commanded better views and larger platforms. At the very top, shrouded in shifting energy fields and ancient technology, the elder races observed everything with the detached interest of gods watching mortals play. Kane had been humanity's ambassador for only 6 months, but he knew this moment would define not just his career, but his entire species' future. Around him, creatures of impossible variety turned their attention to the lone human. Some had too many eyes, others had none at all. Wing-beaten air from the avian Skyrathi mixed with the metallic humming of the robotic synthesis. The smell of exotic atmospheres and alien biology filled his nostrils. Human representative, boomed Supreme Arbiter Korth, a being whose crystalline body refracted light into rainbows as he spoke. His voice carried through translation devices that converted his harmonic frequencies into words every species could understand. You stand before this council accused of the gravest crime possible under galactic law. Kane stood perfectly still in the center of the chamber floor, a small figure dwarfed by the alien assembly. Every eye sensor and perception organ focused on him. The silence stretched like a held breath. "What crime is that, Supreme Arbiter?" Kane asked, his voice calm despite the weight of the moment. "The complete annihilation of the Chronix hegemony," Korth replied. 3 star systems, 47 billion lives, wiped from existence in less than 72 hours. A ripple of sound passed through the chamber. Some species made noises of disgust, others of fear. The Chronix had been one of the galaxy's most powerful military forces, their battle fleets legendary for their ruthlessness. For them to be destroyed so quickly was unthinkable. Kane nodded slowly. "I see. And the Council believes humanity is responsible for this?" "We do not believe," interrupted War Marshal Threk of the Vorthak Empire. The massive reptilian creature leaned forward on his platform, his scarred hide gleaming under the chamber's lights. "We know. Your species was the last to have contact with Chronix space before their communications went dark." "Interesting," Kane said, clasping his hands behind his back. "And what evidence supports this accusation?" The chamber's central holographic display activated, showing detailed star charts. Red markers indicated the former Chronix systems, now showing as empty space. Blue lines traced the movements of human ships in the region. Your exploration vessel, Meridian, was detected on the edge of Chronix, space exactly 74 hours before the hegemony fell. "Silent," declared Investigator Zyle, a tall being whose transparent body pulsed with bioluminescent patterns. "When our probe ships finally reached the systems, we found nothing. No planets, no asteroids, no stellar debris, just empty space where 3 suns and everything around them once existed." Kane studied the display with apparent interest. "That does sound devastating. Tell me, how long did the Council's investigation take?" 6 months of detailed analysis, Zell replied proudly. "We examined quantum residue, gravitational anomalies, and temporal distortions. The technology required for such destruction is beyond anything previously seen in this galaxy." 6 months, Kane repeated thoughtfully. "And in all that time, did any of your investigators consider the possibility that the Chronix might have done this to themselves?" The chamber erupted. Delegates shouted, roared, clicked, and harmonized their disbelief. The very idea that a species would destroy itself so completely seemed impossible to most galactic civilizations. Supreme Arbiter Korth raised 3 of his 6 arms for silence. "Human, you suggest the Chronix committed mass suicide on a scale that defies comprehension? This is absurd." Kane smiled for the first time since entering the chamber. "Is it? Tell me, Supreme Arbiter, how much do you know about human history?" "We know enough," War Marshal Threk growled. "Your species achieved spaceflight barely 2 centuries ago. You are primitive newcomers to galactic affairs." "Primitive," Kane nodded. "Yes, I suppose that's how we must appear. After all, we've only been part of this council for 5 years. Most of you have been traveling between stars for millennia. We must seem like children playing with forces beyond our understanding. He began walking slowly around the chamber's perimeter, his gaze moving from one alien face to another. But here's what you might not know about children, honored delegates. They ask uncomfortable questions. They notice things adults have learned to ignore, and sometimes they see truths that experience has made us blind to. Kane stopped directly below the Vorthak platform, where War Marshal Threk sat. For instance, War Marshal, did your investigation team examine the quantum signatures in the Chronix systems? Of course, Threk replied. Standard procedure. And did those signatures match any known weapon technology? Threk's massive head tilted slightly. No, the patterns were unprecedented. Kane nodded and continued his circuit. Investigator Zill, you mentioned temporal distortions. Were these consistent with external attack patterns or internal cascade failures, the bioluminescent being pulsed uncertainly? The data was ambiguous. Ambiguous, Kane repeated. Now here's where human inexperience becomes interesting. When we reviewed the same data you've been studying for 6 months, we reached a very different conclusion. Would you like to hear it? The chamber had grown completely silent. Even the background hum of life support systems seemed muted. The Chronix didn't disappear because someone destroyed them. Kane said quietly. They disappeared because they succeeded. Succeeded at what? Supreme Arbiter Korth demanded. Kane turned to face the center of the chamber, his expression grave. At building a weapon capable of destroying entire star systems. And then, like the aggressive, expansion-minded military culture they were, they decided to test it. He paused, letting that sink in. The problem with weapons that can destroy stars, honored delegates, is that they tend to be rather difficult to aim precisely, especially when you're firing them from inside the same system you're trying to eliminate. The horror of realization began spreading through the chamber like a wave. If Kane was right, the Chronix hadn't been victims of an outside attack. They had accidentally obliterated themselves while testing a doomsday weapon. Impossible, War Marshal Threk whispered. The Chronix were many things, but they were not stupid. Kane's smile returned, but this time it carried no warmth. War Marshal with respect, intelligence, and wisdom are not the same thing. The Chronix were indeed intelligent. They were also arrogant, militaristic, and convinced of their own superiority. Sound familiar? The chamber erupted again, but this time the noise carried a different quality. Fear was replacing outrage. You see? Kane continued over the chaos. This is what happens when a species focuses all its energy on building bigger and more destructive weapons, without considering whether they should. The Chronix spent so much time asking if they could destroy star systems that they never stopped to ask if they should try it at home. Supreme Arbiter Korth's crystalline form was pulsing rapidly. Human, if this is true, why did you not share this theory immediately? Kane looked up at the Supreme Arbiter, and for the first time his expression carried something that might have been pity. Because we wanted to see what conclusions you would reach on your own. We wanted to understand how a galactic civilization thinks, how it investigates, how it assigns blame. He paused, and now we know. The chamber fell silent as the implications hit home. Humanity had not been defending themselves against false accusations. They had been conducting an experiment, using the most powerful governing body in the galaxy as their test subjects. The question now, Kane said softly, is what we're going to do with what we've learned. The silence in the Galactic Council chamber stretched like a taut wire about to snap. Ambassador Kane stood motionless at the center, watching as the weight of his revelation settled over 300 alien species. The massive crystalline walls seemed to pulse with nervous energy from the assembled delegates. Supreme Arbiter Korth's rainbow refractions had dimmed considerably. Human Kane, you speak of experiments and observations. Explain yourself. Kane nodded respectfully. Of course, Supreme Arbiter. But first, perhaps War Marshal Threk would like to tell the chamber about the Vorthak Empire's recent military exercises? The massive reptilian delegate reared back as if struck. Those exercises are classified military operations. This council has no authority over internal Vorthak affairs. Internal? Kane's eyebrows rose slightly. Fascinating choice of words for exercises conducted in the neutral rim territories, using weapons that violate at least 7 different galactic treaties. Shocked murmurs rippled through the lower tiers of the chamber. The smaller species began chittering and warbling among themselves, while the middle powers shifted uncomfortably on their platforms. War Marshal Threk's claws extended fully. You dare spy on the Vorthak Empire? Spy?
Kane smiled that unsettling smile again.
War Marshal, space is vast, but it's not empty. Every energy discharge, every gravitational distortion, every quantum fluctuation leaves traces that travel at the speed of light. Humanity may be new to galactic affairs, but we've been watching electromagnetic radiation for centuries. He gestured toward the chamber's holographic display, which suddenly came alive with new data. Star charts appeared showing the Vorthak Empire's territories, with dozens of red markers indicating recent weapons testing. For the past 2 years, the Vorthak have been developing planet-cracking technology remarkably similar to what the Chronics were attempting. Kane continued. The quantum signatures are nearly identical. In fact, our analysis suggests you've been reverse engineering Chronics research data. Threk's massive form went completely still. This is preposterous, is it? Kane walked closer to the Vorthak platform. Tell me, War Marshal, where did you acquire detailed schematics of Chronics stellar manipulation technology? Technology that was supposedly lost when their systems mysteriously vanished? The chamber exploded into chaos. Delegates from hundreds of species began shouting accusations, demanding explanations, calling for investigations. But Kane noticed something else happening in the upper tiers where the truly powerful civilizations sat. They weren't joining the chaos. They were watching, calculating. Silence. Supreme Arbiter Korth's harmonic boom cut through the noise like a blade. War Marshal Threk, you will answer the human's question. Threk's yellow eyes blazed with fury, but when he spoke, his voice had lost its earlier confidence. The Vorthak Empire obtained certain technical data through legitimate salvage operations. Salvage operations, Kane repeated slowly. In systems that were supposedly completely empty? Where exactly did you find this data to salvage? When Threk didn't answer, Kane turned to address the entire chamber. Honored delegates, would you like to know what really happened to the Chronic systems? He gestured again, and the holographic display shifted to show detailed technical readouts. The Chronics did indeed test a stellar destruction weapon, but they didn't obliterate themselves by accident. They were deliberately eliminated by someone who wanted their research. The temperature in the chamber seemed to drop several degrees. The quantum residue patterns that investigator Zyle's team found weren't from a single massive explosion. They were from multiple precisely targeted strikes designed to look like a catastrophic accident. Someone destroyed the Chronics, stole their research, and has been developing the same technology ever since. Kane's gaze moved to the upper levels of the chamber. The question is, who in this galaxy has the power to destroy 3 star systems and make it look like an accident? Investigator Zyle's bioluminescent patterns were flickering rapidly. Human Kane, this is a serious accusation. You're suggesting that a council member committed genocide for technological gain. I'm not suggesting anything, Kane replied calmly. I'm stating facts based on evidence. Would you like to see the data? Before anyone could respond, a new voice echoed through the chamber. It came from the highest tier, where the elder races maintained their ancient vigil. The voice was like distant starlight, beautiful and cold. The humans speak truth, announced the Eternal Collective, one of the oldest civilizations in the galaxy. We have observed. We have recorded. The Chronics did not destroy themselves. The effect was immediate and electric. If the Eternal Collective was confirming Kane's claims, then someone in this very chamber was guilty of the worst crime imaginable. Impossible, War Marshal Threk snarled. The Eternals never interfere in galactic politics. We do not interfere, the ethereal voice replied. But we observe. And we have observed the Vorthak Empire's acquisition of Chronics technology through methods that constitute both genocide and theft. Kane nodded toward the upper tiers. Thank you, honored Eternals. Now, War Marshal Threk, would you like to revise your earlier statement about salvage operations? But Threk was no longer listening. The massive reptilian was speaking rapidly into a communication device, his yellow eyes darting around the chamber as if looking for escape routes. War Marshal, Supreme Arbiter Korth's voice carried a note of steel. You will remain in this chamber until these accusations are resolved. The Vorthak Empire recognizes no authority but strength. Threk roared, rising to his full intimidating height. These humans are primitive children playing with forces beyond their comprehension. We will not be judged by inferiors. Kane looked up at the towering alien with something approaching sympathy. War Marshal, that's exactly the attitude that led to the Chronics developing doomsday weapons in the first place. The belief that might makes right, that superior firepower justifies any action. He turned to address the chamber again. This is what we've been observing, honored delegates. Not just the Vorthak, but the patterns of behavior that seem to emerge in every galactic civilization once it reaches a certain level of technological development. The assumption that power equals wisdom. The belief that advanced weapons are the solution to complex problems. Kane paused, his gaze moving from one alien face to another. Do you know what we call this phenomenon on Earth? The Chronic Syndrome. The inevitable result when a species becomes so focused on what it can destroy that it loses sight of what it should preserve. Supreme Arbiter Korth's crystalline form was pulsing with agitation. Human Kane, you speak as if humanity is somehow immune to this syndrome. Kane's smile returned, but this time it carried a hint of sadness. Oh, we're not immune, Supreme Arbiter. We've had our own close calls with extinction-level weapons. The difference is that we learned from our mistakes before they killed us all. He gestured toward the data still displayed on the holographic screens. This is why we've been conducting our little experiment. We needed to understand whether galactic civilization had learned the same lessons, or whether it was still trapped in the same destructive patterns that nearly ended us. War Marshal Threk had stopped his frantic communications and was now staring at Kane with something approaching horror. What are you saying? Kane met the alien's gaze steadily. I'm saying that humanity has been testing this galaxy's readiness for the truth about advanced weapons technology. And based on your reaction to the Chronic situation, based on your immediate attempt to steal and replicate their research, based on your assumption that we must be primitive because we don't flaunt massive destructive capabilities, he paused, letting the implications sink in. I'm saying that this galaxy just failed the test. The chamber erupted once again, but this time the chaos carried a different quality. It wasn't outrage or confusion. It was fear. Because every delegate was beginning to realize that they might have seriously underestimated exactly what humanity was capable of. And if they had underestimated human capabilities, what else might they have gotten wrong about these mysterious newcomers from a small blue world on the galaxy's outer rim? The chaos in the Galactic Council chamber had taken on a new quality. What had begun as outrage was rapidly transforming into something much more dangerous, fear mixed with desperate calculation. Ambassador Kane remained at the center of it all, seemingly unperturbed by the fact that 300 alien civilizations were beginning to view humanity as an existential threat. Supreme Arbiter. Korth raised all 6 arms in a gesture that demanded absolute silence. When the chamber finally quieted, his crystalline voice carried a tremor that hadn't been there before. Human Kane, your implications are disturbing. You suggest that humanity has been evaluating our entire galactic civilization. Not evaluating, Kane corrected gently. Testing. There's a significant difference. War Marshal Threk, his earlier bluster replaced by cold calculation, leaned forward on his platform. Testing for what purpose? Kane clasped his hands behind his back and began walking slowly around the chamber's perimeter again, to determine whether this galaxy is ready for the next phase of technological development, to see if you've learned to handle advanced capabilities responsibly. And we have failed this test? Investigator Zyle's bioluminescent patterns were now cycling through rapid, nervous colors. Spectacularly, Kane replied without malice. Within hours of learning about stellar destruction technology, the Vorthak Empire began attempting to reverse engineer it. Within days, they had started weapons testing. Within weeks, they were conducting exercises that violated multiple galactic treaties. This is exactly the kind of response pattern that leads to civilizations destroying themselves. He stopped directly beneath the elder race's observation platforms. Honored Eternals, in your thousands of years of observation, how many species have you watched eliminate themselves through weapons development? The ethereal voice of the Eternal Collective whispered through the chamber like starlight. 17 civilizations have achieved stellar-scale weapons in the past 10 millennia. 16 destroyed themselves within 1 standard galactic year of deployment. The silence that followed was absolute. 16 out of 17, Kane repeated softly. Those are not encouraging odds. Supreme Arbiter Korth's refractions had become erratic, casting wild patterns of light across the chamber walls. You speak as if humanity possesses knowledge that could prevent such outcomes. Kane's smile was gentle, almost paternal. Supreme Arbiter, we don't just possess the knowledge. We are the living proof that it's possible to survive the transition to stellar-scale capabilities. The chamber erupted again, but this time the noise was different. Delegates weren't shouting in anger or confusion. They were demanding information, begging for details, pleading to understand how humanity had achieved what seemed impossible. When quiet returned, War Marshal Threk's voice was barely above a whisper. You claim that humanity already possesses stellar destruction weapons? Among other things, Kane replied casually, though we prefer to think of them as stellar engineering tools. The difference in terminology reflects a fundamental difference in philosophy. He gestured to the holographic display, which suddenly showed a detailed image of Earth's solar system. But something was wrong with the image. There were too many planets and they seemed to be in impossible orbits. This is Sol system as it appeared last week, Kane explained. You'll notice that we've rearranged things a bit since your last intelligence reports. Mars has been moved closer to the habitable zone to assist with terraforming. We've added 3 artificial planets constructed from asteroid material, and we've installed a Dyson ring around our star to capture additional solar energy. The delegates stared in stunned silence at the impossible engineering feat displayed before them. But that's not stellar destruction, stammered Investigator Zyle. No, Kane agreed. It's stellar construction. This is what happens when a species learns to think of advanced technology as a tool for creation rather than destruction. War Marshal Threk's massive form was trembling slightly. The energy requirements for such construction would be enormous. The gravitational calculations alone are well within our capabilities, Kane finished. This is what we wanted to demonstrate to the Council. That stellar-scale technology doesn't have to mean stellar-scale weapons. That advanced capabilities can be used to build rather than destroy. Supreme Arbiter Korth's voice was barely audible. How long has humanity possessed these capabilities? Kane considered the question carefully. In their current form? About 50 years. But we've been working toward this level of technology for over 2 centuries. The key was learning to develop the philosophical framework before we developed the engineering capabilities. Philosophical framework? The question came from dozens of delegates simultaneously. Kane nodded.
The understanding that power without wisdom leads to extinction.
That technology without ethics is suicide. That the ability to destroy something is never as valuable as the ability to create something. He turned to face War Marshal Threk directly. This is why your species failed our test, War Marshal. When presented with evidence of stellar manipulation technology, your first instinct was to weaponize it. You immediately began thinking about which enemies you could eliminate, which territories you could claim, which rivals you could intimidate. Kane's expression became grave. You never once asked whether you should be trying to destroy stars at all. The Vorthak leader's yellow eyes blazed with desperate fury. And what gives you the right to test us? What makes humanity qualified to judge galactic civilization? Kane's answer was simple and devastating. Survival. He gestured again, and the holographic display showed a new image. Earth as it had appeared 3 centuries earlier, scarred by nuclear weapons and environmental devastation. This was our world when we first developed planet-killing weapons, Kane explained. We came within hours of eliminating ourselves. Multiple times, we had weapons pointed at our own cities, our own people, our own future. And we had leaders arrogant enough to believe that such weapons could be used responsibly. The image shifted, showing Earth's gradual recovery and eventual transformation into a garden world. But we learned. We chose survival over dominance, creation over destruction, cooperation over competition. It took us nearly a century to undo the damage we'd done to ourselves, but we did it. And in the process, we learned something that apparently no other galactic civilization has discovered. Which is, Supreme Arbiter Korth asked. Kane's smile was genuinely warm for the first time since entering the chamber. That the most advanced technology any species can develop is wisdom. Investigator Zyle's patterns had stabilized into thoughtful blues and greens. And humanity believes this wisdom can be taught? We hope so, Kane replied, because the alternative is watching this entire galaxy repeat the same mistakes that nearly destroyed us. And frankly, the universe is too beautiful a place to let that happen. The chamber had grown completely quiet again, but this time the silence carried a different quality. It wasn't fear or anger. It was something approaching awe. What happens now? War Marshal Threk asked, his voice stripped of its earlier aggression. Kane looked up at the massive alien with something that might have been compassion. Now, War Marshal, you have a choice to make. Your entire civilization has a choice to make. He turned to address the full chamber. All of you do. You can continue down the path that destroyed the Chronics and 16 other species before them. You can keep building bigger weapons, claiming larger territories, enforcing your will through superior firepower. Kane paused, his gaze moving from one delegate to another. Or you can learn a different way, a way that doesn't end in extinction, a way that leads to something better than mere survival. The question hung in the air like a challenge and a promise combined. But Kane wasn't finished yet, because he was about to reveal the most important part of humanity's plan for the galaxy, and it was going to change everything. The weight of choice hung heavy in the crystalline chamber as 300 alien civilizations contemplated Ambassador Kane's ultimatum. The massive space that had witnessed countless debates over trade routes and territorial disputes now hosted a conversation that could reshape the galaxy's future. Supreme Arbiter. Korth's rainbow refractions had steadied, but his voice carried new uncertainty. Human Kane, you speak of teaching wisdom to galactic civilization, but wisdom cannot simply be transferred from one species to another. Can't it? Kane replied, his tone genuinely curious. Tell me, Supreme Arbiter, how did the Kethmori achieve their reputation as master diplomats? Korth's crystalline form pulsed with what might have been pride. Through millennia of careful study, trial and error, and gradual refinement of our negotiation techniques. Exactly, Kane nodded. You learned through experience. But what if that experience could be shared? What if the lessons learned by one species could be passed on to others without requiring each civilization to make the same painful mistakes? War Marshal Threk, still visibly shaken by the revelations about humanity's technological capabilities, spoke with grudging interest. You propose some form of educational exchange? Kane's smile was enigmatic. Something like that. But first, let me ask you all a question. How many of you believe that your species is currently at the peak of its potential development? The silence that followed was telling. No delegate raised a hand, activated a communication device, or made any gesture of agreement. Interesting, Kane mused. Every civilization in this chamber believes it has room for growth, room for improvement. Yet when presented with the opportunity to learn from another species' experience, your first instinct is suspicion. Investigator Zyle's bioluminescent patterns shifted to curious yellows. What exactly are you proposing? Kane gestured to the holographic display, which suddenly showed a three-dimensional map of the galaxy. Hundreds of star systems were marked with different colored indicators. This is the Galaxy Development Initiative, Kane announced, a comprehensive program designed to help species transition safely through critical technological thresholds. The map zoomed in to show specific regions. Green markers indicated stable, advanced civilizations. Yellow showed species approaching dangerous technological transitions. Red marked areas where civilizations had recently destroyed themselves or were in immediate danger of doing so. As you can see, Kane continued, the galaxy is full of civilizations at various stages of development. Some, like the Eternals, have achieved stable advancement. Others, like the Chronics, have fallen victim to their own capabilities. Many more are currently approaching critical decision points. War Marshal Threk leaned forward despite himself. And humanity proposes to guide these civilizations? Not guide, Kane corrected. Support. Provide examples. Share experiences. Offer alternatives to destructive development paths. The holographic display shifted to show detailed case studies. For instance, the Helix Confederation is currently developing antimatter weapons. Based on historical patterns, they have approximately 18 months before their technology becomes sophisticated enough to threaten their home system. 18 months? Supreme Arbiter Korth's harmonic voice carried disbelief. How could you possibly predict such a timeline? Kane's expression became grave. Because we've seen this pattern before. Multiple times. The transition from planetary scale to stellar scale weapons follows remarkably consistent developmental curves across different species. He gestured again, and the display showed comparative timelines for various extinct civilizations. The Chronics, the Vash Imperium, the Crystalline Hierarchy, all followed nearly identical patterns of technological development right up until their extinction events. Investigator Zyle's patterns had shifted to alarmed reds. You're saying these extinctions were predictable? Entirely predictable, Kane confirmed, which means they were also entirely preventable, if someone had been willing to intervene. The word intervene hung in the air like a threat. Several delegates began speaking at once, their voices rising in concern and suspicion. Silence. Supreme Arbiter Korth's boom cut through the chaos. Human Kane, you speak of intervention. This implies coercion, force. Kane shook his head sadly. Supreme Arbiter, intervention doesn't require force. Sometimes it just requires information. The display changed again, showing a detailed timeline of human technological development. 300 years ago, humanity was on the same destructive path as the Chronics. We had developed nuclear weapons and were actively planning to use them against each other. We were, by any reasonable measure, months away from extinction. The timeline showed critical decision points highlighted in red, marking moments when human civilization had teetered on the edge of self-destruction. But then something changed, Kane continued. We began to understand the true cost of our destructive capabilities. We learned to see beyond immediate conflicts to long-term consequences. We developed what we call species-level thinking. War Marshal Threk's massive form had gone very still. And you believe that thinking can be taught? I know it can, Kane replied firmly, because we've already done it. The holographic display showed a new image, a star system that none of the delegates recognized. But the orbital patterns and technological signatures were clearly artificial. This is the Meridian System, Kane announced, home to the Aquilan Republic, a species that was developing planet-cracking weapons when we made first contact 5 years ago. The image zoomed in to show peaceful cities, orbital habitats, and what appeared to be massive space-based gardens. Today, the Aquilans use the same technology they once planned to weaponize for terraforming projects. They've transformed 3 dead worlds into garden planets and are currently constructing the galaxy's largest stellar energy collection array. The chamber erupted once again, but this time the noise carried wonder rather than fear. If humanity had already successfully guided one species away from self-destruction, then perhaps their proposal wasn't as impossible as it seemed. How? Investigator Zyle's question cut through the subsiding chaos. Kane's smile was genuinely proud. We shared our own history, showed them recordings of our near-extinction events, demonstrated the long-term consequences of destructive development paths, and most importantly, we proved that there were alternative approaches that could achieve the same goals without the same risks. Supreme Arbiter Korth's refractions had taken on new patterns, more complex and thoughtful than before, and the Aquilans simply accepted this guidance? They chose it, Kane corrected. After careful consideration of the evidence, they chose survival over dominance. Creation over destruction, exactly as we did. War Marshal Threk's voice was barely above a whisper. And you offer this same choice to the rest of the galaxy? Kane turned to face the entire chamber, his expression serious but hopeful. We offer more than choice, War Marshal. We offer partnership. The Galaxy Development Initiative isn't about humanity teaching other species. It's about all of us learning together. The holographic display showed the complete scope of the proposed initiative: research stations, educational exchanges, technological sharing programs, and crisis intervention protocols. Every species that joins the initiative contributes their own knowledge and experience, Kane explained. The Eternal's deep historical perspective, the Kethmori's diplomatic expertise, even the Vorthak's military engineering capabilities properly channeled. He paused, his gaze moving from one delegate to another. This isn't about creating a human-dominated galaxy. It's about creating a galaxy where no species has to face the transition to advanced technology alone. The silence that followed was different from any that had come before. It wasn't fear or confusion or anger. It was contemplation. For the first time since entering the chamber, Kane could see delegates actually considering the possibility that there might be a better way forward. But he could also see the doubt, the suspicion, the deeply ingrained assumptions about power and dominance that had shaped galactic civilization for millennia. The choice was before them. The question was whether they would have the wisdom to make it. The crystalline chamber of the Galactic Council had never hosted a silence quite like this one. 300 civilizations sat in contemplation, weighing Ambassador Kane's proposal against millennia of established tradition. The holographic displays still showed the scope of humanity's Galaxy Development Initiative, casting soft light across alien faces that reflected hope, fear, and uncertainty in equal measure. Supreme Arbiter Korth was the first to break the silence. "Human Kane, your proposal is unprecedented. The implications are staggering." Kane nodded respectfully. "I understand the magnitude of what we're suggesting, Supreme Arbiter. We're asking you to fundamentally reconsider how galactic civilization approaches technological development." War Marshal Threk, his earlier aggression replaced by thoughtful calculation, spoke slowly. "You claim success with one species, but the Aquilan Republic was a minor power. What evidence do you have that this approach could work with major civilizations?" Kane's smile carried a hint of anticipation. "An excellent question, War Marshal. Perhaps it's time you met some of our other partners." The chamber's main entrance dilated and new figures began entering. The delegates turned to watch as representatives from dozens of species filed in, taking positions in the previously empty lower tiers. But these weren't random observers. Each delegation carried the technological signatures of advanced civilizations. "Allow me to present the founding members of the Galaxy Development Initiative," Kane announced. "Civilizations that have chosen cooperation over competition, creation over destruction." The first delegation consisted of tall, graceful beings with silver skin and 4 arms. Their leader stepped forward and spoke in a voice like crystalline bells. "I am Council Singer Lyra of the Harmonious Collective," she announced. "Our species joined the initiative 3 years ago, when we realized our sonic weapons research was approaching planetary destruction capabilities. Today, we use the same technology to terraform worlds through harmonic resonance." A delegation of insectoid beings scuttled forward next. Their representative's voice buzzed with harmonics that the translation systems converted into clear speech. "Hive Speaker Zix of the United Colonies," the being announced. "We were developing bioweapons capable of sterilizing entire star systems. The initiative showed us how to redirect our research toward accelerated evolution and planetary restoration." More delegations announced themselves: the Photonic Assembly, the Quantum Confederacy, the Stellar Engineers Guild. Each had faced extinction-level technological transitions. Each had chosen to join humanity's alternative path. The effect on the original council members was immediate and profound. These weren't primitive species accepting human guidance. These were advanced civilizations with capabilities that matched or exceeded many council powers. Investigator Zill's bioluminescent patterns were cycling through rapid, confused colors. "This is impossible. Our intelligence networks would have detected such a large alliance." Kane's expression became almost apologetic. "Actually, they did detect it. You've been monitoring our activities for years. The problem is that you've been interpreting cooperation as conspiracy." The holographic display shifted to show communication intercepts, surveillance reports, and intelligence analyses from various council member states. All the data was there, but it had been consistently misinterpreted. "Every time you detected human ships meeting with these species, you assumed we were forming military alliances," Kane explained. "Every technological exchange was interpreted as weapons trading. Every joint research project was seen as preparation for conquest." Supreme Arbiter Korth's refractions had become erratic again. "You're saying we've been watching the formation of your initiative for years without understanding what we were seeing?" "Not just watching," Council Singer Lyra interjected, her bell-like voice carrying across the chamber. "Actively opposing. 3 times the Kethmori Diplomatic Corps attempted to prevent our species from participating in initiative research projects." War Marshal Threk's massive form went rigid. "The Vorthak Empire has conducted 17 raids on suspected human weapons facilities in the past 2 years, which were actually terraforming research stations," Hive Speaker Zix confirmed with evident amusement. "Your raids accomplished nothing except interrupting our work to develop better methods for creating habitable worlds." The weight of revelation was crushing. The major powers hadn't just failed to recognize the Galaxy Development Initiative. They had actively worked to prevent it, mistaking humanity's greatest achievement for their greatest threat. Kane walked slowly to the center of the chamber, his footsteps echoing in the stunned silence. "This is the fundamental problem with galactic civilization as it currently exists. You've become so accustomed to thinking in terms of power and dominance that you literally cannot recognize cooperation when you see it." He gestured toward the initiative delegations. These species have achieved technological capabilities that dwarf most council members. The harmonious collective can reshape planetary geology through pure sound. The United Colonies can accelerate evolution by millions of years in just decades. The photonic assembly exists partially outside normal spacetime. Kane paused, letting that information sink in. And yet none of them pose a threat to galactic stability. Because they've learned to use their capabilities responsibly. The ancient voice of the eternal collective whispered through the chamber. The humans speak truth. This collective has observed the initiative species with great interest. They represent a new model for galactic civilization. Supreme Arbiter Korth's voice was barely audible, a model that makes this council obsolete. Kane shook his head firmly. Not obsolete, Supreme Arbiter. Evolved. The council could become the coordinating body for the Galaxy Development Initiative. Your diplomatic expertise, your established communication networks, your authority among member species all of this could be invaluable in expanding the initiative. War Marshal Threk leaned forward. And if we refuse? Kane's expression became genuinely sad. Then you continue on your current path. You keep building bigger weapons, claiming larger territories, competing for dominance, and eventually you follow the same trajectory as the Chronics. Council singer Lyra stepped forward. Or you could join us in building something better. Something that doesn't end in extinction. The chamber erupted one final time, but this explosion of sound was different from all the others. Delegates weren't shouting in anger or fear. They were debating, negotiating, asking questions, proposing modifications. For the first time in galactic history, major powers were seriously considering fundamental change to their approach to civilization. Hours passed as the debate continued. Some species, particularly the smaller ones that had suffered under the current system, embraced the initiative immediately. Others, especially the major powers, demanded guarantees, safeguards, and detailed explanations of how their interests would be protected. But gradually, a consensus began to emerge. Not universal agreement that would have been impossible war, but a recognition that the current system was unsustainable and that humanity's alternative offered genuine hope for survival. When the final vote was called, the result was overwhelming. 237 species voted to join the Galaxy Development Initiative. 43 abstained. Only 20 voted against the proposal. Supreme Arbiter Korth's voice carried new harmonics as he announced the result. By the authority vested in this council, we hereby establish the Galaxy Development Initiative as the primary framework for interstellar technological cooperation. Kane felt a profound sense of relief and accomplishment. But as he looked around the transformed chamber, he knew this was only the beginning. The real work of building a sustainable galactic civilization lay ahead. War Marshal Threk approached him as the session concluded. Human Kane, the Vorthak Empire wishes to contribute our military engineering expertise to the initiative's Defensive Research Division. Kane extended his hand in the human gesture of greeting. Welcome to the future, War Marshal. Welcome to a galaxy where strength is measured by what we build together, not what we can destroy alone. As delegates began filing out of the chamber, making plans for the massive undertaking ahead, Kane allowed himself a moment of quiet satisfaction. Humanity had achieved something unprecedented. They had changed the galaxy without conquering it. They had won the ultimate victory, the victory of wisdom over force.